if I say I or my opinion during this paper, so this is orit speaking and her opinion. In the year 1884, Robert Fryer, owner of an esoteric bookstore, published a new edition of the Pimander. The book included advertising content that presented a new secret society which approached, by its own definition, students of the occult science, searchers after truth, and theosophists who may have been disappointed in their expectations of sublime wisdom being freely dispensed by Hindu Mahatmas. Do we have more light?
Not with projection.
Okay, so excuse
perhaps
me.
Tomorrow we'll bring.
Yeah, we'll try. Yeah. Okay, so theosophists may have been disappointment in their expectations of. Suitable candidates were requested to address application to a certain theosophy, a name which was later corrected to theon. And this revealed that the society in question was the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor, in which theon was involved prior to the founding of the cosmic movement at the beginning of the 20th century. It's okay? Okay, so it's much better for me. Okay.
Et la lumière fut.
Yeah. The HBFL was active only for 2 years, though it influenced the esoteric scene, both in Britain and abroad, profoundly. Theon co-founded in 1884, along with Peter Davidson and Henry Bourgogne, Davidson, a Scottish violin maker, author, homeopath, and herbalist, was an observant Christian that was initiated into an anonymous occult order and used to summon angels by all techniques. His dream was to establish a utopian colony in America, where he immigrated to after the fraternity ceased to exist. Bourgogne, born as Thomas Dalton, learned the esoteric lore from Theon. For him, he served as a medium, using a cover-up story of being the latter's secretary. In 1882, Bourgogne was convicted of charging fees for a fictitious job and was incarcerated for a period of 7 months in prison, a fact which he concealed from his partners in the Brotherhood. Due to his constant slandering of the Theosophical Society, Bourgogne had made enemies amongst its leaders, who exposed his true identity as an act of revenge. This disclosure had an immediate consequence. The Brotherhood's reputation was fatally damaged and its activities ceased abruptly. Bourgogne moved to California, founded the Church of Light, and unveiled the Brotherhood's principles while omitting the actual practice. As for the Brotherhood, although officially operating between 1884 to 1886, it was founded, according to written records, as early as 1870. The initiates were told it was an ancient and eternal circle, unattached to any tradition whatsoever, which was divided into 2 different currents. One operating in Thebes and claiming religious authority, and the other operating in Luxor, claiming spiritual authority. Theon distinguished between an inner circle on the astral dimension, which included members of the Eternal Brotherhood, and an outside circle, which had been operating in the material realm and was established a number of times throughout history, as in the case of the Pythagoreans or the Rosicrucians. Theon, the Grand Master of the circle, was the spiritual leader, but despite his prominent role, he aspired to influence without being influenced, and avoided any unnecessary exposure. Apart from returning to its Judeo-Christian roots, the Brotherhood had other distinct characteristics as well, such as an individual path on initiation and the use of controversial contents as sex and drugs. Today, I, orit, wish to present a few aspects concerning its historical context as well as its active approach, its cosmological apprehension, and its interface with science and psychology. One should avoid portraying the Victorian era using a simplistic narrative. Nevertheless, we can certainly point to a rapid economic growth culminating toward the Victorian Golden Age around the middle of the century and fading towards its end. During the Golden Age, England became a rich empire, one on which the sun never sets. But the extreme shifts between the old and the modern world had their price. The euphoria was accompanied by a feeling of guilt and fear of an approaching fall, causing isolation and alienation. A host of fierce debates and conflicts took place in the seemingly all-important empire. Marxism and jingoism, nationalism and universalism, progress and the disintegration of values, which led many Victorians to experience disappointment and rejection towards the era. The turn of the century witnessed the development of millenaristic attitudes and the ideologies of destructions which were expressed in the art and literature. While the key word in the Golden Age was optimism, at the turn of the century it was replaced by Nordau's degeneration and Weber's disenchantment. The loss of faith and the emergence of science forced a revaluation of man's identity and essence, as well as his rank in the hierarchy of creation. The historical background led to the revival of esoteric movements which offered cosmic keys, detailed doctrines with an alternative cosmology or cosmology to the religious narrative, combining the physical and metaphysical aspects of the universe. This Victorian esoteric renaissance, which began in 1848 with the rise of populist spiritualism, was divided during the last quarter of the century into three intellectual currents: psychical research, theosophy, and practical magic. These movements included thousands of members from society's mainstream, among them scientists, intellectuals, bohemians, and social activists. What was it that allowed the view of occultism as a legitimate field of study, or even as a sign in itself to flourish? Occultism offered the Victorian seeker the unifying frame which religious faith once supplied, while creating an alternative to the segmentation of sciences which cut the field of each discipline from the broader context. Thus, the new rational connection between the physical and metaphysical worlds positioned occultism as a valid alternative to the loss of existential meaning. Among the consequences of the fin de siècle crisis was a shift in focus from faith to reason, which manifested itself in the rise of magic along the decline of mysticism. While mysticism tends to be passive and is subject to the mercies of the divine, magic is active, based upon knowledge and subject to the power of human will. It is my claim, then, that the turn of the century witnessed the uprise of a new syncretic pattern, one which consisted of the use of magical techniques in an attempt to reach mystical states. However, it was not for the sake of experience as such, but rather in an attempt to import insights from the cosmic entities and to implement them in the human psyche for the purpose of spiritual maturation and self-empowerment. This, in fact, meant the reversal of focus of the relations between man and the divine, shifting attention from the work of God by man to the work of man by God. While it is not rare to see the Victorian esoteric wave as a spiritual substitute for the existential meaning once provided by religion, It is my claim, however, that one should not view this shift as a simple substitution of one faith for another, but rather as replacing faith by virtue of the absurd with a fixed knowledge of the absolute truth. The responsibility for finding existential truth has now shifted from a passive reliance on a transcendent God to the individual himself, and magic, in contrast to mysticism and spiritualism, not only supplied one with the right tools, but also returned the control to one's own hand. Theon, who had thorough knowledge of the cosmic web of affinities, believed that the divine spark in the human soul gave human beings a prominent mission in the universe, and dismissed the idea that one should devalue oneself in relation to the divine. The HBFL was influenced by Hermetic practices, alchemy, Kabbalah, the solar myth, and Gnosis, and suggested first-hand solid information from metaphysical beings. The Gnosis made clear that the path of redemption is through transformative redemptive knowledge, and the serpent was seen in as the, and I cite, the urgent intellect which is beginning to bud from within. Appeal to the innocent souls and fill them with indescribable longing for change, for broader vistas of knowledge. Cosmogenic and cosmology were linked in the Brotherhood to the notion of truth. It is my claim that at the turn of the century, a new perception of truth has developed, one which existed between the rigid deterministic materialism and the quantum probability in which the notion of truth inherently includes its negation within itself. At that time, Victorians believed in an ontological, multifaceted truth, one which the spectator had to discover from his point of view. The truth supplied existential meaning in a form both unified and coherent, and with a varied content which enabled inherent contradiction to exist. Without a path dictated by either the church or the academy, the responsibility of discovering the truth was now up to each individual. This new permission given to man to design reality according to his own wish encouraged many to find and create new affinities and open space for ideas which were not always in line with common criteria. Thus began scientists and intellectuals to construct worlds of esoteric content using scientific tools, while occultists aspired to season it as much as they could with a scientific flavor. The absolute truth was considered the holy grail of the spiritual quest. Therefore, the Brotherhood aspired to establish itself as the ultimate body of knowledge. Its turn towards the seekers of truth was a hint that it might possess the desired answer. Members of the inner circle were presented as advocates of the truth who passed it underground, while the world makes the mistake of believing the truth to be reflected in the Christian dogma. In this age, the church will be extinguished, and I cite, but from their ashes, phoenix-like, shall arise a new religion, whose shining motto will be, Veritas Excelsior, truth above. What was the nature of that truth is a subject for another lecture. I will not just mention its hermetic nature based on the postulate, as above, so below, as was the conclusion that the spiritual aspects will be the complementary of materialistic science. On the human level, at the moment one incarnated in a human body, it was his duty to rediscover his own truth by knowing his creator, in accordance with the level of his spiritual attainment. Thus, and again I cite, truth will be realized within. It will not require one single shadow of external phenomena to convince that soul that it is fully prepared for the master's reception. The notion of truth was usually attached to holistic theories that emerged during the 1870s as a counterbalance to both the positivistic science, which established itself as the only objective way of understanding the world, as well as religion, which was emptied of spiritual meaning and became an object of intellectual discourse and comparative study. While reductionism aims to explain a set of characters by a single principle, holism aims to connect those characters into one unified structure, thus sometimes suffusing it with a religious or spiritual meaning. The new metaphysics needed a common ground shared by its different elements, which resulted in the materialistic science having to widen its horizons and include within itself paranormal and other mysterious phenomena, the SPR, while the esoteric world had to approach an intellectual milieu and adopt, the same way as science, an active and purposeful stance. In this spirit, the Brotherhood aimed to supply a wide, integrative, and holistic theory of knowledge, claiming that, I cite, we acknowledge the eternal existence of the great first cause, the divine, invisible, central, spiritual sun. From this divine vortex proceeds the invisible power which binds the vast universe in one harmonious whole. We'll turn to speak about the Brotherhood and science. At the turn of the century, Lord Kelvin claimed that the process of mapping the natural law was almost complete, apart from 2 points of uncertainty regarding the subjects of light and heat. This saying is remembered as one of the more amusing anecdotes in the history of science. But in reality, it reflected science's high status in the eyes of the Victorians as a prominent key of understanding the universe. Scholars tend to emphasize the occultist disgust with the materialistic paradigm, though I claim that science's powerful status was in fact something they sought to imitate. Science offered magic a respectable image and reputation, which intertwines with its purposeful approach and body of knowledge which echoed the laws of the universe. Thus, it is my claim that the admiration of the esoteric world towards science was a prominent cause in the subversion of faith into knowledge. According to the Brotherhood, the world had always operated as a structured mechanism, and the cosmic hegemony was always presented as science, whether it was a physical science, describing the world as seen, an occult science of the unseen world, or the science of psychology, which described the epistemological realm of understanding the universe. The Brotherhood's attitude towards science was complex. On the one hand, it criticized it on the grounds of being one-dimensional, while on the other hand, it used a scientific terminology as well as a body of data it named science without putting it to the test of neither affirmation nor refutation. Its objections to science were not on the grounds of its contents, but rather against its narrow boundaries and decisive rulings, as well as its negation of the possible existence of unexplained phenomena. However, the empirical findings were seen as the universe's way of revealing its powerfulness, and if science has so far failed to reveal the empirical mechanism of a given phenomena, then the conclusion was that humanity was still not ripened for that. The Brotherhood's utilization of terms such as the occult, esoteric, or holy science was reflective of its attitude towards science and magic as complementary fields, in which matter is but one of the correlations of spirit. However, far more than supplying an esoteric frame for scientific ideas, it supplied esoteric ideas with a scientific frame. The combination of the Hermetic tradition with empirical science had colored British occultism with a distinct shade, somewhere between a felt wonder of the numinous and a set of dry user manuals. Particularly interesting were the case studies of energy and electromagnetics, both active forces lacking any physical characteristics to the naked eye, yet creating physical impacts. This became a model for other hypothetical unseen forces that might be capable of operating in the physical world. Maxwell's 1864 sensational discovery that all forces may be transformed one by another had placed the issue of energy at the center of physics. And since it supported the theory of unification, the occultists were quick to assimilate this idea. In the Brotherhood's writing, the term energy became an abstract force which operates every single event in the cosmos, while its combination with metaphysical adjectives supplied it with a scientific validation. Thus, for example, they were to speak of divine energy, sacred creative energy, cosmic energy, mental energy, and life energy. Despite its fluid nature, the term usually manifested in three different contexts. The first, descriptive, as a synonym to the numinous. For example, harmonious order evolving its energies in great, mighty ways. The second, ontological, which paralleled the characteristics of the center of the universe or the divine and the physical character of energy. The law of the conservation of energy deals with a given eternal essence, and so is the omnipresent Godhead. This Godhead, like energy, manifests and expresses itself through dynamic forces, liable to change on conversion. And I cite, within the universe, there is a great central source of intelligence, power, presence, and energy, which necessarily knows all that was, is, and is to be. This central power must be environed by colossal mental energies, potentialities in knowledge, only second to its supreme self. In the third context, energy manifests itself as a potential generating force which is infused to men by God, connecting between human beings and supplying man with a creative force of his own. As for magnetic and electromagnetic fields, these are energy forms in which the occultists were interested in due to the principle of remote action, which was integrated with the Hermetical principle of affinity. The magnet played an important role in magic rituals, and the Brotherhood dealt with subjects such as astromagnetic currents, which dominated the elemental spheres of the Earth, or the magnetic point as its axis, which constitutes the great finger of nature's cyclic timepiece. The Brotherhood also explained the mechanism of the influence of magnetic forces on the human brain, which expands and becomes illuminated by the lunar solar influx from the new to the full moon, at which time this magnetic force is at its maximum. That was a citation. The human soul was considered to be the arena in which the interactions between magnetic, cosmic, and animal forces took place. The pure first people dominated the magnetic currents of the globe. Fatal souls were drawn to yearning magnetic attraction for such forms of life, and the asexual souls of paradise were attracted to the earth like a magnetic tractor, drew them within the vortex of its grosser elements. The magnetic force was also a scale for measuring magical capabilities. Virgins and widows were considered more skillful than men, especially young girls, that, and I cite, their magnetism is pure, unmixed, unsexed, and purity means power in all things magnetic and occult. The magnetic forces, like energy, were seen as a cosmic conductor for the soul's consolidation, a theme which I will later develop. And I will move to discussing the interface with psychology. The Brotherhood statement that during our era, psychology will become the special study of the greatest science of the day invites one to check the connection between magic and this new discipline. The occultist had always separated between the soul that was manifested in the human body and the immortal and eternal spirit which operated in a spiritual realm. Towards the end of the century, the word soul was substituted by the obscure term mind, and the vague notion of psyche, which was used as a general name for a wide range of mental activities, and used as a general name for a wide range of mental activities. These changes were far more than semantic ones. They reflected an emergent psychology which tended to reduce mental processes to mechanistic and neurobiological activities. The Brotherhood, on the other hand, brought the message of a new psychological genre, one which did not deal with curing symptoms only, but rather concentrated on revealing the authentic self. This genre included characteristics which will later be developed in existential and transpersonal currents, which view the human mind as constituting a unified whole. Here, the process of self-fulfillment reminds one particularly of the Jungian individuation process. Jung himself, it is worth noting, was influenced by similar esoteric sources, in which the individual's potential is fulfilled by a collective subconscious or a higher self, acting as a moral compass, tools which by no means are scientific. At the very core, right between the two poles of magic and science, the Brotherhood positioned the concept of consciousness, using the magic toolkit filled with pseudo-scientific and pseudo-psychological terms. Energy was not only used to measure the forces of the soul, but define its course of action. And I cite, "It is the blessing or cursing energy of the soul and is at once the grandest and most terrible force alike, potent for good or evil." In addition, both energy and willpower were used as a measure of self-control, as well as that of the creative force, and the disciples were ordered to enslave their desires to enable the soul to put forth its highest energies and powers, and so direct the potential will. The Brotherhood relied on the Hermetic affinity principle, but suggested in addition a physical mechanism for the storage and retrieving of energy. This magic act demanded a transformation of energy as a potential force taking different forms. Thus, the initiates studied the principle of infusion for the solar force, which renews the life energies of the soul and regal, and practiced magic sex, which was the nearest spot to the very portal of divine creative energy. They've also been introduced to the principle of formulation, emphasizing the evolution of the soul and the ideal use of the assimilated forces, claimed that, and I cite, man receives, conserves, or stores up the deific energies and then imitates the laws of his own creation by radiating and projecting this borrowed energy upon the lines and in the special forms and angles of his own formation. The magnetic force also deviated from its physical functioning, connecting between the forces of the universe and the psychological, as well as physiological forces. The Brotherhood viewed the soul as an energetic field and treated concepts such as spiritual and magnetic as equal physical and mental forces. Theon always warned of nervous states of spiritual exposure in the fragile link connecting soul and body, where the soul is ambushed by hostile entities waiting for a moment of imbalance. The initiate was also told that the magnetic forces would only work when the personality is unified and the mind is calm, and that his spiritual maturation is dependent on the control over his desires and dark urges, which also operate as magnetic force. It is not the actual, this is a citation, it is not the actual external indulgence in any particular practices that constitute the real vice, but it is the power, force and magnetic control which this habit or practice gains over the inner self that constitutes the actual transgression against the higher laws of our being. End of citation. The Hermetic principle of likes attracts like manifests in the magnet activity which attracts from the universe and into the soul in a circular, elliptical, and magnetic act. The same contents that it is occupied with and are now amplified, for better or for worse, by their original character. An unstable personality might attract destructive forces which are capable of eliminating body and soul. The most delicate situation for the soul, where it is under the influence of its magnetic force, occurs during the act of magic sexual intercourse, the perfect electromagnetic and nervous condition, which its aim is influencing one's wife or husband, directing the internal thoughts, and magnetically controlling them, or to gain personal magnetic powers. During intercourse, the spiritual or magnetic states of being are at their peak, which raises a need for being highly restricted in relation to the purity of intention and to the mental matureness of the initiate. The sexual act must bear a distinct spiritual character, otherwise severe consequences as to the mental state of the partner might occur. For instance, a man who operates on the basis of pure sexual lust risks a magnetic abomination toward the woman who may magnetically attach an evil being to her otherwise human child, will obsess it completely during life, and doubtless lead it to the scaffold or asylum. Again, this was a citation. The Brotherhood's cutting-edge combination of magic and psychology favored the idea of inner transformation, the ability to change individual patterns, and a perfect inner nucleus hidden under its many layers, waiting to be revealed. In addition to an emphasis on consciousness, psychology and magic had also, in addition to an emphasis on consciousness, psychology and magic had also shared a subjective view of reality and a striving toward the fulfillment of human potential, as well as practical techniques such as meditation, guided imagery, and the repetition of mantras for purpose of self-persuasion. Theon and his partners supplied their initiates with toolkits containing knowledge, concentration, adjustment, persistence, and the use of willpower as a generating force. And most important, the Brotherhood's emphasis was not on the next world, but on this one. And again I cite, myriads of worlds swarm in space where the soul is in rudimental states, performs its pilgrimages until its cyclic progress enables it to reach the magnificently organized planet whose glorious function is to confer upon the soul self-consciousness. Only when the soul has completed this task, one truly becomes a human being. Conclusion. The HBFL had been a pioneer in the field of magic practice in Victorian England, presenting an integrated doctrine of science and magic, mediated by consciousness. The Brotherhood aspired for a relevant and up-to-date existential meaning with the slogan, "There is only one royalty, one aristocracy, that of intelligence." And though content-wise it lead upon knowledge considered to be spiritual, it adapted, nevertheless, a form of a rational model. And while scholarship tends to concentrate on the criticism held by esoteric movements in relation to materialism, it was my intention to point out, using the case of the Luxor Brotherhood, how it was none other than the admiration of science that formed their thought. In addition, I have pointed out that the Brotherhood corpus of knowledge included a significant psychological aspect, not in the reductionist neurological sense of the era, but rather in a holistic one. The alternative existential meaning that the Brotherhood supplied was in the acting out of a divine potential or a higher self hidden within the soul, going through a spiritual evolution, drawing from metaphysical sources, but aiming toward the physical world. To a large extent, the Brotherhood endowed a perception of the soul as a separate, independent entity, going through its unique process, which is tailored according to its own unique measure. In addition to conducting a life of ethical pureness, the Brotherhood members were obliged to love their human brothers, and I cite, working for the progress of all social reforms beneficial for humanity. The individual being an active agent in the cosmological process, one whose spiritual progress was not only in the name of individual salvation, but for the benefit of humanity as a whole. Thank you.